Perfect. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to episode 7 of the ECOP Programme webinar series. This is a collection of online, live and interactive sessions featuring expert speakers, networking opportunities, and we're highlighting extremely relevant topics for early career ocean professionals. So my name is Natalie Fox, and I'm the communications coordinator for the ECOP Programme. And on behalf of everyone at the ECOP Programme, and especially the training and mentoring task team who have helped organise this webinar, thank you for coming. So today we're going to be covering that crucial and often challenging topic of funding. So much like an iceberg, there is always a lot more below the surface when it comes to applying for and successfully obtaining funding, and it is not easy. So today we've partnered with the Challenger Society for Marine Sciences so that we can inform you about a range of funding opportunities available for ECOPs, including the Chris Daniels Award, the Stepping Stones Bursary, and the Daphne Jackson Award. And today we're so grateful to our 3 special guest speakers who will be sharing their knowledge, experiences, and advice on funding applications to help make your research and career goals a reality. So just a bit of an overview about the webinar today. Each speaker will have the floor for about 15 to 20 minutes, and there'll be some time at the end for direct questions. There'll hopefully be some more time at the end for an open discussion. And we just ask that if you have any questions to put them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them at the end. If you can just keep your microphones muted and your videos off during the presentations, and that would be great, but maybe you want to turn them on at the end when we do the discussion. So before we introduce our speakers, we'd like to know a little bit more about you and where you're coming from geographically, but also in terms of funding. So I'm just going to launch a poll, and if you can take part just by clicking through the questions, that would be amazing. Here we go. So if you want me to speak through it really quickly, it's just whether you're an ECOP. Are you someone that self-identifies as being the first 10 years of any career or sector related to the ocean? So can everyone see the questions here? Not getting any. Can everyone see the poll that's coming up?
So I'm able to do the questions, but don't see any poll.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. If you can see the questions and you can kind of answer them, that's perfect. You can just go through all 7 of them. So it might take a little bit of time for everyone to go through them, but I'm going to leave it up as I start to introduce our guest speakers. So you can kind of have that on the side, and I'm going to talk about these incredible women that are joining us today. So our first guest speaker is Terri Souter, a polar marine ecologist with 15 years experience of researching in both the Antarctic and the Arctic, looking at the effects of climate change and human pressures on seafloor ecosystems. Terri is the postdoctoral representative for the Arctic Marine Ecosystem Research Network, or ARCTOS, and is heavily involved with their ECR development through workshops and trainings. And she's also a reviewer for grants and proposals. And next up, we have Samantha Garrard. Sam is a marine ecologist with a PhD in the impact of ocean acidification on seagrass. She's previously worked for the Ascension Island government, and since receiving a Daphne Jackson Research Fellowship in 2020 from the Challenger Society, she has worked on the impacts of plastic pollution on marine ecosystems at the University of Plymouth and is currently based at Plymouth Marine Lab. And our final guest, who will be wrapping up today, is Sophie Wilmes, a physical oceanographer and climate scientist based at Bangor University. Sophie has a PhD in tidal dynamics and is currently a postdoctoral researcher investigating Archean climate dynamics. She coordinates the Travel Awards and the Stepping Stones Bursaries for the Challenger Society for Marine Scientists. So I think you'll agree that today we have an excellent lineup. And now I'll be handing it over to our guest moderator, Siddhi Joshi. So Siddhi has been instrumental in bringing our guests together. And Siddhi is also an independent marine biogeoscientist and an oceanographer based in London. She has a PhD in marine sediment dynamics and a master's in law in international human rights. And Siddhi coordinates the ECR network for the Challenger Society for Marine Scientists. So Siddhi, I'm going to hand it over to you and I'll be here to assist if you need. I'm just going to ask to unmute you.
Hello, and thank you very much for your kind introduction, Natalie. I'd just like to say a few words about the Challenger Society Early Career Research Network. And welcome you all to this to this webinar. So the Challenger Society Early Career Researcher Network is open to anyone who self-identifies as an early career researcher in the marine sciences. So we organise webinars, training events, and different networking opportunities for early career researchers in the UK and internationally. We aim to foster and support diversity at all levels in marine science, and we believe that that ECRs have a critical role in advancement of ocean sciences, and would like to support ECRs and ECOPs in whichever way we can. I'd like to introduce Terri Souter, who's a polar marine ecologist with 15 years of research experience in both Antarctica and the Arctic, and is also a postdoctoral representative of the Arctos network, and is heavily involved with development of workshops and training for ECRs. Terri, I'd like to, was also a recipient of the Chris Daniels Early Career Researcher Award from the Challenger Society, and she'll be speaking. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Terri.
Thank you, Siddhi, very much for that kind introduction. And just while I'll upload my slides, hopefully everyone can see. Yeah, thumbs up from you guys. That's great. And super nice to see that we have a good amount of participants joining the webinar today on what is generally quite a hot topic for all of us in research. How do we get the money to do our research? I am Terri Souter, based up in Norway, northern Norway, at the Arctic University. I spent 10 years with the British Antarctic Survey in the UK as well, and as was mentioned, I am a postdoc representative for the Arctos network, just up here on the top. And the reason I highlighted this is as I actually feel that being part of a big network like ECOP, like the Marine Challenger Society, all of these networks is only an advantage when it comes to applying for funding. So bear that in mind. We need all these little tools in our toolkit, if you like, to give us advantages when we come to getting ourselves on board for different funding opportunities. And networks are definitely one of them. And I'll touch a bit more on that in a little bit. And I also just mentioned IC3 as I've just taken a new job. So I will be the project manager for IC3. And this is a 10-year project looking at ice sheet loss on the effect on the global carbon cycle, but they put a big emphasis on early career development. And there's a reason for that, because you spend a lot of time and energy on your early career scientists. You enhance them and you help them develop into something more, rather than them going through a PhD and a postdoc and having all these amazing skills and knowledge and then disappearing. So the aim with this project is actually to try and support the early career scientists through mentoring and also through support in funding applications so that they can continue later on in life and be successful researchers past PhD and postdoc. So I will just go on to my next slide. So I put this picture up here because I feel like when we think of writing funding proposals, it just seems like a difficult challenge. And similar to some of my research in the polar region. So some of these pictures just highlight trying to do research in the Antarctic and arriving at the boat shed and finding 2 meters of snow, or trying to put the boat in the water and an iceberg breaks up and gives you lots of small bits of ice, or spending 8 hours cutting a hole through the sea ice in the middle of winter and the next day the wind comes along and blows your sea hole away. So in life, we're faced with lots of challenges, but it's how we deal with those challenges. And the next slide, I would like to highlight some opportunities to make yourself more appetizing when it comes to applying for bigger grants. So let's start small, you know, rather than looking at these massive grants with big daunting glasses on, we can think to ourselves, okay, well, how do I make myself appealing on those big grants? Well, one of the things is to show you've won some small grants. Often difficult to win a big grant when you haven't got history of winning some small grants. And actually the smaller grants are often a lot easier to obtain, less competitive. Often people aren't as aware of them. So if you can get yourself looking at other opportunities for these small grants that will enhance your research so you can show you've won grants, it will make you have a higher success rate when you come to applying for bigger grants later on. And I just put a couple of examples here, but there are many. But often they're not necessarily known unless you look. So what I would say is, for me, I work in polar benthic ecology. So I just pick a couple of keywords. So similar to when you're doing a research paper and you write your keywords for your research, think about the things that you're working on and then search for those. And often you'll find these little institutes that have these small pots of money. So there's the Marine Institute, which is based in Ireland, but they have small funding grants for different things related to the marine. But then I also highlight here on the right-hand side, there's this, the RAFOR Foundation. So there's a picture of a tiger there, but basically that's anything related to conservation. So if your research somewhere ticks the box of conservation, and you can spin that angle, might even be blue carbon related, or so it could be marine or terrestrial. They've got some opportunities for some funding. And then there's the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research. UNESCO has Save Our Seas Foundation, the SWOF, and the British Ecological Society. So what I'm trying to put out there is there are many of these small pots of money in different areas, and you can find them by searching of keywords of your research and then have a look at what they offer. And often there are multiple calls within the year where this opportunity will go out that you can apply for those little grants, and get yourself some of these smaller grants and then put them on your CV. So just moving on to the reason I guess I was invited to be part of this, Siddhi reached out to me because I was very fortunate to get the Chris Daniels Early Career Grant, which is offered through the Challenger Society for Marine Science. And so there are multiple, but I won't go into a lot of detail because I know there's a talk coming later that will touch on more about the different awards and grants through the Marine Challenger Society. But I personally wanted to have a workshop on how to review scientific journals. I felt there was a big gap. Us as researchers are often asked to review journals, but we're never really told how to do a good review. And I thought, well, how am I going to run that workshop when I have no money? And so I had a look around in the same format as I mentioned on my previous slide. And I came across this Chris Daniels Early Career Grant, which basically encourages early career researchers who want to run networking opportunities, workshops, etc. And so I read the scope for the grant. I thought actually what I'm trying to do fits there. So I applied and was successful. So I got the money, and actually the money I got from the Chris Daniels Early Career Grant not only allowed me to organize this workshop about how to review scientific journals, in which I could have a journal editor come and talk to us within that workshop. I also was able to run a second workshop with some leftover money from that grant, which was about communicating science to policymakers, on the media, outreach, that kind of thing. So communicating to non-scientists. So I managed to get 2 different workshops. So not only did I tick the box of here's an example where I won an award or a grant, but I could also then enhance my own career by running workshops, and as well as finding out myself how to do a good scientific review, because that was something that I hadn't done much on. So that was where I came in on an invite to join this workshop. So then moving on a little bit, the next part is workshops on proposal writing. So each and every one of us are based in different institutes, whether we're a university or a research institute, but generally within the institute, they will have someone who's assigned to dealing with funding. So I know, for example, the British Antarctic Survey, we had a specific person that dealt with distributing the information that was out there in terms of the funding opportunities that was available, and assisting you with writing your funding application. So if you don't know who that person is, find them, because they exist. They might just not make themselves very obvious. And at the university, they also have a team of people, because it's in the university's interest for you to win funding proposals. So they want to support you. They want to make sure you write the best application. And I just highlighted here webinars. I know we're on a webinar at the moment, but they're very, very useful because you can fit them into your schedule at any time of day or night, and work around your own schedule. But I just highlighted this one, which was a webinar from Horizon Europe, which is the new setup from the EU in terms of the different calls and proposals. And there is a 2.5-hour webinar. So they go into a lot of detail about how to write a successful EU proposal. But the other one to highlight here is that within the EU, they're not all about big, fancy, big consortia, many institutes. There are smaller calls. So like I mentioned earlier about the other types of small pots of money you can apply to, there are those small calls within the EU as well, and often they're not known about. And so when they're not known about, the competition is a lot less. And so I'll touch on it in a bit more detail, I guess, in a bit, but there's a EU Horizon dashboard where you can actually go and look at these different calls, and it tells you when the calls will come out and when they need to be handed in or submitted. And the best advice I can give is start early, because a last minute proposal very rarely gets funded because it comes across rushed. So give yourself time to think, okay, maybe in 6 months' time, I'm going to be ready to try and put a proposal together. Let me start looking about what's out there now. There are also courses. So on the right-hand side, I just said funding your own research course. there are also courses that are run about writing research proposals. So if it's something that you feel you've not had a lot of experience or want more experience with, then have a look and find these courses. There are free ones online, but also within the university, they normally run a course about how to write your own research proposal. So don't feel that you're on your own is what I'm trying to put out there. There is support. So just moving on a little bit, I've got like the Zoom screen covering some of what I'm looking at, but the point I wanted to make here is to make yourself visible. And I know we're all super busy and sometimes it's very time consuming, but if you make yourself more visible to people, they'll find you a lot easier. And that's my next slide that I'm coming to in a minute, which is about getting yourself on review committees so that you can help review other proposals. So you can see how proposals are done. So you'll see how good ones are done and how awful ones are done, and don't go down that route. And so you'll pick up a lot of tips, but you also see how the evaluation committees work. So when you sit within a committee of normally about 5-6 people, depending, you can start to understand the types of things that they're looking for within your research proposal, and it will make you write a better proposal yourself. But they're unlikely to reach out to you if you're not visible enough. And unfortunately, that does mean putting a bit of time in online. I personally like the idea of having a website. It takes time initially to set up, but then as you go on, you just add, so that time is less. And also then for, Twitter is very useful for these things. I must say I'm not advocating for social media. I'm not necessarily a fan, but I make the effort for these reasons. And so just to mention a couple of the funding associations that I was contacted by. So there's the Polish Science Academy on the left, which initially is quite small, but they reached out and asked whether I could review some proposals that had been submitted to them for not huge amounts of money, so maybe equivalent of 20,000 euros. But they needed to also establish a review committee. Every funding agency needs to show that it's gone through the right evaluation. And so, and they very kindly even offered to give me €100 for my efforts. So, it's not always for nothing. But then from there, it really started to build up. Once one committee reaches out, other people then start to reach out. And then the National Science Foundation in the United States asked that I would review a big proposal, which was worth a lot more money. And that was a different experience in that it's a bit more of an effort involved. But also you find that you start to learn a lot more about other research that's occurring out there and some really interesting projects for collaborations potentially, which is useful for the time that you invest. And I would definitely say I learned a lot along the way about what works in putting in a proposal. But some of the smaller ones, so the British Ecological Society, they have a review committee application form that you can fill in on their website and just suggest, this is me, this is my background, this is my research field. You can even put a couple of options of the areas you're interested in, and I would like to be part of your review committee. So there you can actually put yourself forward, and they'll look at you and who you are and what you do, and they'll come back to you and say, would you mind reviewing these proposals? So if you're interested, I suggest having a look on their website. So just moving on a little bit, when you come to deciding whether you're going to write your funding proposal, there's a few things to bear in mind that will save us all a lot of time in agro, because ultimately you don't want to spend time writing a funding proposal that's not going to be funded, because that's a waste of everybody's time. And so just a few small tips I wanted to point out here is really make sure that the funding call you're applying to really matches what you want to do, like the top, because they'll just not read further if it doesn't. So does it align with the call that they're putting out there? If it's blue carbon in seagrass beds and you're applying for blue carbon in seafloor ecology, maybe it's not okay. And there's always a contact person with these calls. So if you're unsure, send them an email. leading internationally, definitely, and at the bottom I even put interdisciplinary. It's really important. And again, I come back to the beginning of my talk where I suggested networks, because within these networks is the best way of making international and interdisciplinary connections. And you can already see the few people that we've got today are very interdisciplinary and international. So as soon as you join a network, you can tick some of these boxes about starting to know the people that you can then invite to be on your proposal. Definitely have some form of outreach involved. These are things that are important on funding pools at the moment. They need to be shown that we're actually using the money that taxpayers pay us and giving back by doing some outreach activities to the public, which I feel is very important. And then how are you going to advance scientific understanding? Because we're all very passionate about what we do in our research. We all feel that what we do is very important, but you need to show how this is advancing what we already know. So there's just a few points that you can really guide yourself along. And the other point I wanted to make is the scoring criteria are always available. So if you decide you're going to apply for a pot of money, get hold of their scoring criteria for your funding proposal, and actually look at how they're going to rate you and go through it and score yourself. And if you're not ticking enough boxes, then you need to really go back and have another go, because it just will waste your time. So really have a look at that. And again, I mentioned the timing earlier, but give yourself enough time, because a rushed proposal comes across to the evaluators. And the other bit that I highlighted is teamwork. And the reason I highlight that is none of us are good at everything. I will hold my hands up and say, I'm not brilliant at writing the right way, so I can write well, but with proposals, sometimes there's a way to put them across. There's certain buzzwords that come across, and some people are very good at that. So if you know people that generally are quite good at that, then get them in your team and write a proposal together. You don't have to feel isolated and sit at home on your own feeling like I've had no support and I'm trying to write this proposal. No one's ever shown me how to write a proposal. Get a team together, even if it's just 2 initially. And for bigger ones, obviously you need a consortia, but teamwork is important. And then the reason I put this image of the CV template in here. So the European Union, they put a CV template on for their early career researchers, as in if you were going to submit a proposal, we would expect your CV to look like this. And so you're going to have to go and redo your CV in that format. And actually, I find it very useful to look at the format and go through all the different sections and find the bits that you have nothing. And if you have nothing, think about it. Maybe I do have it, I just haven't thought about it. I did this thing that I could put there. And if you definitely don't have it, then find a way that you can fill it in. I haven't got organizing a conference side events. So maybe I've got this conference I'm going to, I can find a way that I could do that. And just try to maximize filling in that CV, because ultimately, if you're going to apply for a proposal with the EU, they want that CV. And then that's how they're going to rate you, because it's not only about a scientific excellence, but it's also about the excellence of the person who's applying for that funding. So there's both those aspects that are taken into consideration. Yep, so I touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about EU opportunities. So it's just highlighting there's this new all singing, all dancing horizon dashboard within the EU. But even if you're not thinking about writing an EU proposal, the useful thing with this dashboard is you can go in there and see about what other calls are in process. So it shows you projects that are being thought about, and you can even reach out to the leader of that call and say, hey, this is me, and I do this research, and I really think it's fitting for the call that you're trying to submit, because there's these 2-step processes. So then you can actually say, how do I get involved? And they might be like, brilliant, we need more people for work package 3 within our call. How would you like to be within the actual project? So it's really useful for that, but even just for connecting with other people in your field. So even regardless of whether you're applying for funding or not, I advise everyone to have a look at the EU dashboard to see what kind of projects are actually being submitted at the moment, and also the calls that are coming. So for the EU, they have a September round, which I feel is probably a bit too soon, but they have the February round. So maybe for people that are keen, they can start looking already at the calls that are open and potentially want to submit something for February 2024. And I just highlighted this because here, this is Nature, and Nature has got an online course in persuasive grant writing. And this is, again, free opportunity online. So if you're feeling like the opportunity hasn't come your way within your university or institute to become better at writing grants, then see where other opportunities are. So this is online. I can share the link later on if I haven't put it on my slide, but otherwise you'll find it pretty easy in the Google search. But I'm just, again, highlighting, don't feel alone. There is help out there. And I think I'll stop there. Hopefully I didn't go too much over time.
No, you're perfect. Just right on time. Thank you so much, Terri. This has been really informative, really helpful, and also coming from someone who's been successful. So great advice that we can all follow. I'm going to open it up. If there is any questions for Terri specifically, you can raise your hand or you can just pop it in the chat. And we've got a couple of minutes. And I really liked how you highlighted this interdisciplinary kind of movement that's happening at the moment. And do you see that, if I can ask a question while we wait for other people, with this intersection between oceans and climate? Do you see that you already mentioned about how the opportunities for ECRs are kind of happening in the Arctic. So is this a big area you think that there are opportunities for us to develop in?
Definitely, because sadly, we don't live in a world where everything works by itself. You know, what happens in the ocean affects the atmosphere, affects the sea floor, affects the sediments, and everything is interlinked. And now funding agencies are really realizing that actually a proposal to work and to advance our scientific knowledge substantially, it needs to be interdisciplinary. It needs to have those different connections. And one of the great thing with the Marine Challenger Society, for example, is it brings everyone from all aspects of marine, and a great spot for definitely connecting with the biogeochemists and ecologists and oceanographers and ice sheet modelers, and so it gives a really good opportunity there to make those connections. I know for myself, for the last 6 years, I've been working on animals that live on the seafloor and looking at the carbon they store within their skeletons and thinking, this is amazing, this, you know, opportunity to understand how much carbon we're drawing out the atmosphere and storing. But ultimately, no one was interested unless I could show how much carbon was lost from the carbon cycle. And that way I could only do that by working with biogeochemists, because I need to know what's happening in the sediments. And I was never going to have the knowledge to do that. So I had to find colleagues. And so, yeah, it's super important.
Amazing. Thank you, Terri. So we don't have any questions at the moment, but maybe if you've got a question, you can pop it in the chat and we can come back to it. And maybe just to kind of keep within the time, we can head over to our next guest straight away. If that's okay, Sam, if you're ready to go, if you're ready to share your screen, and then we can make sure we've got some time at the end for questions and for a discussion with everyone. Now, first of all, I think I need to unmute you. And then hopefully you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, let's see.
Perfect. Yes, you just need to make it a little bit bigger. And
there we go. Is that working?
Spot on.
Right. Okay. So I'm Sam. I work at Plymouth Marine Laboratory. I actually originally went to university with Terri, which is why she asked me to be part of this this talk. I'm taking a slightly different approach to Terri. I'm talking a little bit more about the rocky road to research that I think lots of people experience. So I did my degree at Plymouth, and I didn't start my degree till I was 25. So I travelled Europe, I'd worked in bars, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to study, and I ended up doing a foundation I didn't do A-levels, so I did a foundation degree and then went on to study marine biology. And then after that, I wanted to experience more of the world. So I went to Australia. I worked as a research assistant at James Cook University. And then I got offered a job with Operation Wallacea, working in Honduras and Indonesia and Egypt. So I thought with this talk, I would be competing with Terri on the photograph scheme because she has so many amazing pictures of the Antarctic rather. But yeah, so I taught coral reef ecology and conservation. I supervised dissertation students. I worked with local NGOs to collect data that they needed. And as I said, I worked in 3 different sites within Operation Wallacea. That wasn't always year round, but I travelled and I worked as a dive master and just kind of experienced the world. But I got to a certain point where I thought, actually, I need a bit more than this. I need a career. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I went back to university and I went to King's College in London to do a master's in aquatic resource management, and realised that policy maybe wasn't quite my thing, and I really missed diving and I wanted to be back out in the field again. So then it was my turn to look for a PhD. And I got a PhD at the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dohrn in Ischia in Italy. I looked at lots of different approaches. I actually found this PhD on findaphd.com because it was associated with the Open University. But I also, I looked at PhDs in Australia. I looked at possibly doing a PhD at the National University of Singapore. I think I also looked at some American universities as well. And they're not always so easy to find, but you can go onto the websites and see what's there. And you can also contact people who are researching in areas you're really interested in and speak to them about what they've got coming up, whether they have any PhDs, whether there's any open PhDs where you get the opportunity to write your own research proposal. And the nice thing about PhDs is you can be international. You can kind of go anywhere and have a good chance of getting that PhD if you write the right proposal. So I spent my time in Italy, and I worked on the effect of ocean acidification on plant-animal interactions in a Posidonia oceanica system. And this was amazing. I had a great time. I was really interested in the work. My colleagues were great, and I was in this tiny research station that had about 5 researchers on this beautiful island. So I spent most of my time with my head in seagrass, but then halfway through my PhD, something happened that wasn't quite anticipated and kind of made me think, oh, what am I going to do? This happened. So this is my daughter, Allegra, which was at the time was both amazing, but incredibly rocky sensation of how will I cope? I'd found out that during my PhD, they hadn't paid any social security for me. So I wasn't entitled to a career break, to a maternity leave. So if I wanted to carry on with the PhD, if I took a maternity leave, I would have to pay the fees myself for another year. Or I just took the 4 weeks that I had left of my year and then came back to carry on with my PhD. And that was my kind of option. So I decided to do that. And I was very lucky that the secretary at work's daughter had just lost her job. So she was quite happy to look after my daughter on site in the research station. So it actually came together, and I did manage to finish my PhD whilst I had a baby in tow. And it was great because she kind of grew up in the research station and got passed about. So very different to any UK places where health and safety would definitely not allow that. After my PhD, I was very lucky. I got a job quite soon working at Plymouth Marine Laboratory, where I worked as a marine ecosystem services researcher. And from a career point of view, things seemed to be going really well. I was getting papers coming out. I was getting into the swing of things. I suddenly had this contract. I was getting less stressed. But then at home, things weren't so good. My daughter had never been away from me. So she hated nursery and she was crying all the time and it was horrendous and I didn't know what to do. So after this not getting better for nearly a year, I started to look for other jobs and I found this job on Ascension Island. So I thought, another island, I can take her to work. It'll be just like Italy. I could go to work. And so we moved over to Ascension Island, but we had the same problem in that I was working long hours. I was diving at 6 o'clock in the morning, doing biodiversity studies. And then I was working with the fishermen in the evenings and she couldn't come along. She was a toddler and apart from anything else, just the pier was dangerous for toddlers to be toddling about. So in the end, I decided that it was time for me to take a career break. So during that career break, 1 became 2, and suddenly 6 years were gone and I hadn't worked. And so it's really difficult. I think coming out of science can be an incredibly difficult time because you don't really know what you're going to do. If all you've known is kind of that research side of it, where do you go from here? How do you get back into science? And it's not just people who have career breaks, it's people who are on short-term contracts with postdocs. It's that constant fear of where are you going? What are you going to do? And I mean, I applied for jobs everywhere. I mean, I applied for postdocs. I didn't get a look in. I applied for jobs at places like the Environment Agency, Natural England, DEFRA. Again, didn't get a look in. I think I even applied for like Sainsbury's and coffee shops, but I didn't have any experience behind a till, so I didn't get a look in on those either. So I was getting very depressed about it. And my son had just started going to nursery a couple of days a week. And I was, keen that I wanted to do something. But one of the job interviews that I went to was for the Environment Agency, and it was working in plastic pollution. And whilst I'd been getting ready for that job interview, I'd started researching plastic pollution. But I was suddenly reading all the papers and reading all about it. And I suddenly got fascinated by this huge problem and how it was escalating. And I just thought, this is something I want to work on. I want to work on plastic pollution. So I came across the Daphne Jackson Trust. And this is a bit of a lifesaver, not just for women. There's quite a lot of men who've taken career breaks to look after their children. And, people who've come back from a career break through ill health as well. So it's anyone who's had a career break for either caring responsibilities or through ill health that can apply for a Daphne Jackson Trust. So I contacted them saying that I wanted to work on plastic pollution and how did I go about doing this? And they were really good and spoke to me about how I could get through it. I had to first find a supervisor. So I had to find someone who was willing to take me on together a research proposal. So the whole process took about a year, and having not worked for 6 years, it was quite hard. I think you lose your confidence and you kind of have to plod on and keep going. But I did, and I think one thing you've got to think about when you write research proposals is you want something that you're going to be interested in, a topic that you're going to be interested in. And I think in this day and age, with so many threats to the marine environment, is about how is this topic important to society? How will it help? And also, who do you want to work with? So I think these are three key questions when you are thinking about putting in a research proposal. And yeah, writing a proposal is hard, and you need to persist with your ideas and have conviction and carry on even on the days when you don't have conviction, because there'll be a lot of times when you stumble and you feel like it's falling apart. But if you keep going, you will get there in the end. So I got a postdoc with the University of Plymouth. So I spent the next 2 years working on the impact of tire particle exposure on estuarine marine organisms. Now, I'd never worked in a lab before, so this was completely new to me. But it's given me a really good backing. And I think talking about the interdisciplinary, you don't need to keep yourself these days in a small niche. I think it's quite beneficial to try different types of science and get that bigger picture thinking going. So I spent 2 years at Plymouth University, and then I've moved on to Plymouth Marine Laboratory, where I'm working on some big projects. I'm assessing the key drivers of plastic pollution risk to coral reefs in Southeast Asia. And I'm assessing the risk of plastic litter to marine biodiversity in the North Atlantic. But again, my contract ends in a year, so I'm back to the proposal writing stage. I was trying to think of potential funding streams. So in the UK, we have the UKIRI funding finder, which has some good a lot of calls on it. I've got a couple of proposals going in through there, but there's also lots of different postdocs you can look for. I think if you're willing to move, there's more opportunities. I'm kind of set now that, yeah, my kids go to school. Oh, have I lost something here? Oh, geez. I'm going to stop sharing for 2 seconds because the presentation has disappeared. Right, where's it gone?
Yeah, don't worry.
Okay. Right. Slideshow.
It's back.
It's back. I'll just get it back onto the slideshow. Okay, so there's I think just keep looking out for opportunities, but one of the key things as well is to network. Let people know that you're looking for funding. I mean, there's a lot of people who get projects that, you know, may only need a few months' work or bits of work here and there. So the more people you tell that you're looking for funding, the more chance you have of getting those bits of funding. And also they might have, you know, they might have really good direction on where you could put your funding. So if you've got ideas where you should be looking to put those funding ideas. So, you know, go to meetings, go to networking events. And also in terms of getting ideas, go to seminars, listen to as many people talk as possible. Don't keep your little narrow blinkers on, because if you hear people talking from all different disciplines, you may not realize it at the time, but they're going to give you ideas in the future. All those different bits of knowledge will all add up. So it's all really important that you make sure you maintain these networks. And if you have a good idea, if you've got something you're passionate about, have the conviction to follow it through. No one's going to write that proposal for you. You've got to do it yourself. So thank you. Any questions?
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. And really great to hear your story, because this is something so personal, and we all have lives, personal lives that have to go along with our career path as well. So it's been really great to hear how that has kind of weaved in and out, and how you've managed to have a family as well at the same time as being a researcher, which is great. There should be some more webinars on this. So yeah, I'll ask out there if there are any questions, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to put it in the chat. I have questions, so whilst we kind of hang on, see if there is anywhere. I saw that you had obviously been working with Professor Richard Thompson, who is like who really was the lead in marine plastic pollution, bringing it to light. How did you manage to get him on board? How did you approach him and start working with him? Because this is great advice. Find someone who can be your mentor or your supervisor. So how did you do it?
So with Richard, because I'd done my undergraduate degree at Plymouth, I kind of used that contact that I knew him. He wasn't the only person I'd contacted. So I knew that I wanted to work on plastics. And one of the downsides about the Daphne Jackson Trust is they don't they don't provide bench fees, which essentially means that the university will have to cover some of that funding as well, which can make it quite difficult. So I knew it wasn't as easy as just finding someone and writing a proposal. You have to get the university to come on board as well. So I didn't narrow my options down to only Richard. But, you know, in all fairness to him, he came through and yeah, but I think don't narrow your options is one of the things to say. If you've got an idea, it can be placed lots of different places. You don't have to just stick to one idea and one person in mind. And also, don't worry if people don't email you back. Researchers, and particularly at that level, are incredibly busy and incredibly overworked. So when people don't answer your emails, don't take it personally. Just keep emailing.
This is the question. When do you stop badgering them?
Someone will answer eventually.
Great. And at the moment, as you've kind of transitioned, are you taking on any new students? Are you working with like up and coming researchers and providing mentorship, or is there anything happening at PML that you know about?
I'm just putting in a proposal which would have junior researchers, so post PhDs on it. I also have a master's student at the moment. I'm quite keen on having master's students. And I also had a PhD advertised, although unfortunately it was a competition PhD and went to a different project. So yeah, I'm really keen on working with young people, particularly women, you know, who've had a career break, because I think you've got all that expertise that kind of just goes. So to bring it back is really important. But yeah, I you know, from the minute when I worked with Operation Wallacea, I've always loved working with students and junior scientists. So definitely.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And if anyone does have questions, and just pop them in the chat and we'll try and get to them at the end, and there'll be time for a discussion. And just to save that time, we're going to move on to Sophie. So thank you, Sam. And yeah, we're heading over to our final guest, Sophie Wilmes. I'm going to ask to unmute you. And then if you can share your screen, you have the floor.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Just find this. Let's go to the front. Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Sophie Wilmes. So I'm currently a postdoc at Bangor University working on oceanography and climate dynamics. But I'm also representing the Challenger Society at this event. I'd like to start a little bit about the Challenger Society for those that don't know much about the society. So the Challenger Society is a marine science society in the UK. It's named after the Challenge expedition, which took place between 1872 and 1876, and was one of the most, or the first, but also really influential oceanography expeditions, and is still contributing to our knowledge about marine sciences at present. And I just popped in a little map of the route the cruise took at that point in time, and a picture of the ship, so you've got a bit of an idea of what the whole cruise might have looked like at that point in time. So the Challenger Society has a whole host of objectives. I've just listed a few here that might be most relevant to the people in this webinar. So ultimately, the most important goal of the society is to advance the study of marine sciences through research, but also education. The Society aims to do that through encouraging collaboration between both the sort of marine science research base, so I guess that's all of the academic institutions, but also encouraging collaborations with industry. They are also a contact point for public debate and for the government on the development of marine sciences, but also marine science issues. Now, this is the point where it starts getting really relevant for early career researchers. So every 2 years, the Challenger Society hosts the Challenger Conference, which often is a conference where which brings mainly the UK marine community together. But in contrast to a lot of other conferences which are very focused on certain aspects of marine sciences, it actually has a very broad basis and covering all of the marine science disciplines, ranging from biogeochemistry through ecology, through oceanography, and is therefore a really valuable point of bringing researchers together and also fostering collaborations on an interdisciplinary sort of or cross-disciplinary level. And the last one was held at the Natural History Museum in London in memory or the 150th anniversary of the Challenger expedition. Then the other thing to highlight, which again ties in with the points that both Terri and Sam mentioned, the Challenger Society also has a whole host of special interest groups. For example, there's one on sea level, there's one on physical oceanography, and these are really useful forums for getting to know what's going on in the specific group or area that you are working in and fostering collaborations between people that are working on similar topics. So basically a way of keeping up to date. They tend to meet on an annual basis, and often meetings are tagged onto the conference as well. So if you're already going to the conference, you can also on the last day, often or on the first day, attend these SIG group meetings. Then there's a further thing that's really interesting for early career scientists. So there are regular publications of basically news in the society, and there's a really nice journal as well that gets published, I think, every quarter of a year, and that has articles on research that's being carried out, profiles of people and their stories in research, opportunities, things like that. And then, last but not least, the Society also provides financial assistance to students and early career scientists in marine sciences. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I encourage you to go to the Society's website and just have a look around, and maybe if you're not a member, also consider joining, because again, this is a really good and useful forum to find out more about what's going on in the marine science community. So I'm going to talk about 4 awards today. So we have the Treble Award, the Virtual Conference Attendance Award, the Stepping Stones Early Career Bursary, and the Chris Daniels Early Career Grant. So first of all, I'm just going to quickly go into what the Challenger Society defines as early career researchers, because that is a definition that can vary quite wildly between institutions. So in the context of the Challenger Society, early career researchers are researchers or ocean professionals who are within 8 years of their highest degree or their equivalent professional training. Or else, if they're not in research anymore, within 6 years of their first academic appointment. So this allows some flexibility for career breaks. So if you've been on, I don't know, maternity leave and had family care, you've had health breaks, or COVID-19 related issue, these get calculated out, or say if you work part-time for that period as well. So let's move on to the Travel Awards. So these are meant for PhD, master students and fourth year degree students in UK research institutions who are Challenger members. The aim of these awards is to provide financial assistance to attend scientific conferences, workshops, participate in cruises, field work, and activities like that. We've also funded internships at different organisations, things like that. For UK travel, the Society awards up to £250, and international travel, it's £500. And PhD students can receive up to 2 awards throughout their studentship. Every year there's 4 deadlines, so they always fall on the 15th of January, April, July and October, and each round has a budget of £1,500. So that means that each round we can award up to 3 international travel awards or more if there's UK travel. So here are just a few examples and pictures of places that students have been through the travel awards. So on the right is a sort of list of activities that we funded in the past, and you can see that there's a huge range of different activities that have been funded, ranging from big international conferences through workshops, but also fieldworks, cruises all over the place, and all to sort of amazing places through the world. Then through COVID-19, we developed a new award, which is the Virtual Conference Attendance Award, which again is funding for PhD, MSc and master students. And that is to attend scientific conferences or workshops virtually, with a background that at that point in time, or actually since then, many conferences now have a virtual option, which means that people don't need to travel, but we still want to enable people to go to conferences. And this is also a really good opportunity for people that might not be as flexible traveling across the world or don't have the budget to do so, but would still be able to attend conferences and present their research or learn about the research that is going on. The similar deadlines apply, and you can apply for up to £250 to cover the conference registration fees. And this attendance award falls under the same budget as the travel awards. Moving on, the Stepping Stones Bursary is for UK ECRs and early career ocean professionals, currently with indefinite employment. So these are for people that have moved beyond the PhD stage. Again, this award is open to Challenger members, and with the idea to support career development. For example, to establish new research or further existing research, with the idea of, for example, developing grant proposals, or being able to gain qualifications towards or skills towards sort of further developing research. Then we might be able to cover laboratory cost. It could cover attending scientific conferences, workshops, participating in cruises and fieldwork, or other associated costs that are necessary to be able to carry out or develop research. However, it's worth noting we cannot cover salary costs because we are a charity and not an employer. You can apply for up to £1,000 per award, and we actually have a few awardees in this webinar at the moment, and who received this grant in the past. There's 4 deadlines each year, again, the same ones as for the travel awards and the conference attendance awards, and per round we can award one award. So you can apply if you are at the end of your contract, so within 6 months of your contract ending, or currently without employment. So again, it's also a great opportunity if you have been out of research for a while, you want to find your way back in again. This can enable you to essentially carry out activities that might help you come back into the research. Here are just a few examples of the sort of activities we've funded. So, for example, this was an expedition to Cocos Island in Costa Rica, and looking at baited remote underwater survey data in one of the sort of last pristine ecosystems. Then we also, a different funding opportunity here was for a Euromarine foresight workshop in Zagreb, again with the aim to sort of develop knowledge furthering and sort of international development of international research collaborations and sort of identifying of research gaps. A further researcher that we funded visited the university in New South Wales in Sydney, and that was a face-to-face meeting, essentially to start developing new methods that then could feed into further research. And last but not least, we have the Chris Daniels Early Career Grant, which was mentioned earlier, and of who Terri was a recipient. And it's essentially an opportunity for motivated early careers researchers to create or establish a forum to discuss specific challenges or resources relevant to ECRs in the field of marine sciences. And this grant was established in memory of Dr. Chris Daniels, who was a young marine biogeochemistry chemist who worked on the Geotraces program, and who was a passionate advocate of ECRs, and was involved with the development of the Challenger sort of diversity groups, who unfortunately and very sadly passed away in 2018, cutting short a promising career in ocean sciences. And his family kindly decided to establish this award in his memory. So there's a budget of £1,000 to organise the standalone early career workshop, or to attach it to an event, to an existing conference. So the funding can go towards or be used for the costs of the space or the catering services, or travel support for the ECRs attending, or also for speakers attending. So this is open to Challenger members inside, but also outside the UK. So they stand in contrast to the other awards, which are only for members inside the UK. So we have an annual deadline. So the next one coming up is the 1st of April, 2024. And the awardee will get public recognition at the next Challenger Society conference in Oban. And then Terri is one of the past awardees. So that was for the workshop on how to review for scientific journals. And again, so this sort of workshops help ECRs how to sort of discussing how to review journals, and for example in that case costs covered meeting room hire, conference attendance fee for the speaker, and refreshments. So just a couple of tips for applying. So first of all, go to the Challenger Society website to find some details of the award you would like to apply for. Read the details, read the guidance, look through the application forms. Before you apply, double check that you are actually eligible for it. But in this case, as long as, so from a topic point of view, that's not the complicated point. So because these awards cover all research that that is related to marine sciences. The applications are ranked by council members of the Challenger Society. So it's essentially a ranking that collected and we take an average. They ranked by the benefit to the career of the applicant, the relevance of the timing within the career. So will the applicant really benefit from the proposed activity? Do they show an enthusiasm for a career in marine sciences? Have they thought through their finances? Is this a good way of spending the money that they've asked for? And then also we ask for a letter of support from, for example, a supervisor or collaborator, as in maybe your boss, people like that. So any questions with that? Drop me an email, just ask. I'll try and be of assistance. So here's a really brief overview of all of the opportunities we have, and head over to the website, and if you have questions, just ask.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Fantastic. So that's a great overview, and definitely speaks to what Terri was saying in the beginning about applying for smaller grants, making it much more feasible to then kind of going up that scale towards the bigger grants as well. So even just writing a proposal and then getting all the kind of credentials is work in itself. So doing it with something manageable is a really, really great place to start. Great. So is there any questions specifically for Sophie? I know we've had some kind of questions come up more around the regions, and because a lot of our network is from Africa as well, just wondering if there's any grants that you knew of off the top of your head that are based in Africa, or maybe about connecting UK researchers with African researchers. I do know that our ECOP coordinator Anthony is now based at PML, so he managed to work with PML and went with, I don't know if you know him, Sam, but yeah. So he managed to receive a fellowship. So yeah, I think it's something that is starting to really grow, and more opportunities are coming in this area. I don't know if anyone wanted to speak to that in particular. Maybe Terri, if you're not based in the UK as well.
Yeah, I made a few comments in the chat, but I suggested to people there are opportunities for students still based in Africa. There's the British Ecological Society Africa grant, which is only open for those that are in Africa. So, and that's a really good opportunity, because already it kind of narrows the competitive side down, because it's one continent, if you like. And that's available twice a year. So I put the link in the chat. But the other opportunity that I suggested to those from more challenging countries that have less opportunity for funding is to reach out to researchers that are in other countries and look for people that you're doing work in a similar field, for example. So I gave an example of Lancaster University in the UK, where there is a professor there who's carrying out research in Western Africa, and they're looking at fish nutrition and the impact on global health, for example. And so there, you already have an opportunity as an in to say, well, I am based in West Africa and I'm interested in fish population. How can we connect? And maybe it's not her directly, but she might know someone who's putting out a funding proposal and can link you in. So that was another suggestion.
Okay, yeah, so another key point about this networking, and it's been really great to see how everyone is connected through this Challenger Society, and how the Challenger Society, through what Sophie was talking about, is offering these grants and this financial support. We'll just see if we can maybe, Sophie, you've been asked if you could share the slide again about the awards for the Challenges Society, if that's possible. And maybe Naomi, you can take a screenshot. Great. And
is that okay? Got it?
I think she might have got it.
Cool. Yeah, I'll stop sharing again.
I wanted to just bring the conversation quickly around to the Decade of Ocean Science, because obviously the ECOP programme is established as a programme within the Decade of Ocean Science, and part of our kind of role and our mission is to really support early career ocean professionals in the integration and the rolling out of this global framework of facing these challenges and reaching the vision of the Decade of Ocean Science. And I just wondered if you had any sort of vision for working with early career ocean professionals to kind of meet the challenges of the decade. And this webinar has definitely been tackling one big challenge for early career ocean professionals, which is funding. So do you think there are other things that we kind of need to focus on to help early career ocean professionals be part of the decade, and also just to work on ocean science in general, which is extremely complex, and there is a lot happening right now. It's pretty critical times. Who would like to go? That's to everyone as well.
I can jump in quickly, just briefly, to say that there's definitely a need for early career researchers' voices to be heard and to be integrated into already existing networks and communities, because what can happen is that there's a lot of successful proposals written by senior researchers, and that would only benefit from having ECRs inputted into that proposal, but that doesn't often happen. And I think sometimes it's a bit of our own fault, not making our voices loud enough and reaching out to people enough. So I think sometimes we have to be a bit more pushy to make sure that we're heard. Yeah.
Great. Anyone else? Otherwise, we can go to a question from Regina. Does anyone else want to speak to that question, or should we go? Oh, we've got a great question from Regina. Okay, so I recently got abstracts accepted to present at a conference. However, as a postdoc, there is a very limited travel funding, and my project does not include travel funding or conference registrations. And so the deadlines have gone for the year after she received the confirmation. And so just, not being able to then have that covered. Another challenge is that most travel grants are only limited to PhD students, and a lot specifically exclude postdocs. So do you have any advice about this? So thank you, Regina.
Can I jump in quickly, because I'm like itching to say, because I know this is frustrating, because often there is this time difference, like Sophie highlighted, there's this time separate when the calls are out or when you can apply, and sometimes you get your abstract accepted and you have to book your flights and things, and then nothing matches up and you're like, but I have no money. And but just reach out to the conference organizers, because there is often these small pots of money that are sitting there that they have available for people that don't have funding. So don't ever feel that you're stuck. And I know this for a fact, many who couldn't participate because the funding wasn't available through their project or through other means, and they still were able to come. So there's always options.
And there's always a bit of a pressure to attend these conferences as well. So what do you feel about attending as ECOPs? Is it worth all the travel? Is it worth spending the money and applying for funding for the time to be there? What would you say?
I think it's definitely worth going to these things. You never know who you're going to bump into, what talks you're going to get to listen to, who you're going to meet. and how those links might, you know, help your career in the future. So I think it is really important. And I think sadly, some postdocs come with really good travel budgets for conferences and others don't. I had that with my postdoc. Daphne Jackson didn't really come with a travel budget, although I didn't notice it so much because it was during COVID, so everything was online anyway. But yeah, I think unfortunately it's definitely one of the problems is a lot of the travel budgets are for PhD students and not for postdocs, because they expect by postdoc that you will have a travel budget associated with your projects, and that's not always the case. But yeah, I guess it's just look and see what funding you can find out there, what small grants. I think the British Ecological Society may have small grants to help with travel. Yeah, so just go online. But unfortunately, I think this is a problem that PhD students tend to get the funding for travel and not postdocs.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. Yeah, again, I mean, the Challenger Society is the same. We give most of the small pots of money to the PhD students, and I guess ECRs who are out of employment. So really trying to sort of bridge that gap for people that are currently don't, or about to lose their sort of, I guess, their positions, or are trying to come back into their oceanography, or I guess marine science career. One thing I would add is sometimes it is a virtual option as well, which isn't as good as, of course, as the face-to-face meeting and things like that, but it does enable you at least to participate, and it comes with costs that aren't as big as the ones associated with traveling, I don't know, maybe halfway around the world and staying in expensive hotels and things like that. And even then you can try and arrange meetings with people, you can hear talks, your talk or presentation will hopefully be heard as well. So whilst that's not the ideal option, it is still an option.
Great.
I just had one small comment that saves me typing in the chat, but many of the conferences are so big these days that actually they require volunteers. And so you could offer your services as a volunteer, which then would mean they cover you being at the conference without having to find that funding.
Yeah, that is a really good point, actually. Yeah, and there's lots of conferences coming up. We've got another COP coming up. We've got the Ocean Decade Conference coming up in April, and then after that, the Ocean Conference. So these are just the big global ones, but I'm sure there's really important national ones in between. So yeah, this is another area of funding that maybe needs its own webinar. We've just identified that. And how to maximize your time at a conference if you are having to apply for funding, get funding, and get yourself there and back as well. So great. Well, we'll leave it there for questions, or if there's anyone else that would like to ask something, let us know now. Maybe Siddhi, we can share the link to the Challenger Society network, the ECR network. We can add this into the chat again. And yeah, if there's any final thoughts from anyone, please take it away. Otherwise, I will say thank you so much to our guests. Thank you so much to our three special guests, and to Siddhi as well from the Challenger Society. So we will have this recording of the webinar on our YouTube channel as soon as possible. We'll have it onto the ECOP website, onto the webinar page as soon as possible as well. So if you didn't get to see it all, then you can watch the recording. At the end of the webinar, they'll come up as a little survey just to say if you've got any feedback, if there's any other topics you'd like covered in our webinar series, then you can let us know, and just let us know how you feel about funding if you learned a little bit more, and it would be great to have your feedback. So thanks again to Siddhi, to our special guests, to everyone for coming today, and I hope you have a wonderful Friday. Goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye all, thanks. Have a good weekend.